unless you have far too much money and money to burn, who's doing billboards outside these days, right? What benefit and value does your organization gain by being able to change it?
Hello and welcome to Break Free with TopRank Marketing. I am Joshua Nite, Senior Content Marketing Manager at TopRank Marketing, and I'm here this time with Dez Blanchfield all the way from Australia. He is the founder and CEO of Sociaall, a digital media company, but I think that is a reductionist take at your resume, though, if we look at it. But Dez, welcome.
Hi, Joshua. Great to see you. Thanks for making time to catch up with me.
So I'm looking at some of the people you've worked with and some of the businesses that you've in, and it seems like a little bit of everything that has anything to do with technology. How would you categorize your resume so far?
I think the one-liner that I tend to get from my son is that it makes me look old. The short version is that over the last 3 decades, I've come through the ranks for a whole range of global organizations, from some of the household brands we know like IBM and Intel and HP and so forth in various spaces, as well as run my own companies, building companies, running them and then selling them. So yeah, it's a mixed bag of working for large brands, gaining experience, as we all do when we're young. And then as you get older and you realize that you're not going to get rich working for somebody in a desk job, you start to build your own companies. And I've also done a lot of work around state and federal government and other different agencies over the years. I mean, I guess one of the things that having a working life that's 30 plus years long is that you've done a lot of things, right?
Mm-hmm. And I see from just some of the skill sets that you're talking about, and I see cloud computing, big data, machine learning, blockchain. It seems like it highlights that all of these things are kind of interconnected now. Do you think it's a good idea to not specialize in just one of those things?
Yeah, I mean, there's almost a pun in there, isn't there? I think the way that I usually describe that is that and I get this a lot from younger generations saying that, and that ages me, I guess, saying that, but a lot of folk that are sort of under 30 say, oh, you do so many things. I'm like, well, actually, not necessarily all at the same time. I mean, at the age of 14, I used to forge my mum's signature, which I make no secret of now. It's not going to get me a detention. I used to forge my mum's signature to get out of school early. And I think my teachers thought I had either serious dental issues or mental issues. In that it would always be the same stupid excuse I'd make up. But I would get out of school early and go and do 2 afternoon or evening shifts working in a data center about 5 or 6 blocks down the road from the college that I was going to at the time, from 14, 15, 16. And, I went from putting paper in 132 column line printers to run reports to loading reel-to-reel tapes on mainframes and mid-range and VAX and PDP systems, computers the size of a room, from the age of 14, 15, 16. To then moving into an application development space, then systems development, and then moved into the hardware space, and then networking, security, and then over time, like everyone does, you sort of dip your hand into project management and service delivery. So over the years, I've definitely worked from software development, hardware, security, cybersecurity, planning, logistics, and so with that comes a bunch of experience where on your CV it looks like you do a lot of things, but as I said, I don't do them all at once. It's kind of like when you think about when you have kids, they're born, they learn to crawl, they learn to walk, they learn to run, they learn to sprint, and then they learn to calm down a bit and take things on one bit at a time. And if you looked at these kids and went, oh my God, they run, crawl, spit, sleep, eat, it's like, oh, they don't all at once. So I think when you've got a few years under your belt, it's easy to think that someone looks like a generalist and does a bit of everything. I guess the way I'd wrap that point is, because it's a great question, is that over the years, what I've been able to do is see new waves of opportunity come along. So in the 80s, it was sort of like mid-range and networks and the transition of different private networks to public networks, to X25 and X21 networks to public telecom networks, to then the internet came along, Y2K boom, the dot-com boom, Web 2.0, cloud, AI, machine learning, big data, cloud analytics, all these things you can imagine. If you can picture that as those trends came through, I generally was able to see them early enough to build a team around me, build a business, leverage them, offer them as services, and make some money out of them, and then sell the business before the curve collapsed. Which invariably means that I've done a lot of things, right?
Absolutely. It seems like we are probably closer in age than I would I would think. But I think we both have that digital divide that we're straddling, where we remember a world without the internet and remember a world without cell phones and broadband and all these things, but we are comfortable in the world where all of these things exist and only occasionally stop and marvel at, oh, I haven't touched a paper map in 50 years, whatever. But so that does make me wonder, though, the progress that we've seen so far in our lifetimes, it seems like we might be on the cusp of changes that are just as dramatic, but that the pace of that change is accelerating. Is that something that you're seeing?
Indeed. And I think if we were to go back 3 to 5 generations, I would have a similar observation. So you're absolutely on point there. If I think about the transformation that took place in the lives of, say, my grandparents, where, radio sort of came along and then TV came along, and then my parents, where TV became color and radio became something that you would just have, a wireless in your car, and one you'd carry in your pocket, as opposed to a big television set size thing sitting in the room where everyone sat around and listened to radio shows, right? Once upon a time, people would sit down after dinner and listen to the radio, and there'd be some sort of, amazing story. And when you think about, War of the Worlds, for example, there were people in New York who panicked thinking that aliens had attacked America when War of the Worlds was announced as a radio show, thinking that this was fact and real, when in actual fact it was just people sitting around listening to a show, just like people watch Netflix now. So when you look at that rate of change, it has context at every generation. Certainly it feels like things are moving faster now than ever before, and I think that is because the barrier to entry for disruption and change has become so low and so affordable. When you think about what Steve Jobs did, for example, when he went through that transition of being kicked out of his own company and then finally coming back after he'd built Next Step and Pixar, there was a great anecdote where I remember having a conversation where he said something to the effect that he saw the Newton, for example, thought, interesting product, but too early, and he killed the product. He killed the Newton product. It was a great thing. I loved it because I could send faxes from it, and I'm a fan of facsimiles. Still have a fax machine just to annoy people, send them stuff and go, I'll fax it to you. But he knew, he had just had a gut feeling that the change was coming, that a technology would be available with screen technologies and other things, and the apps, and the iPhone became a reality because of that. So he killed the Newton product off and then rebirthed it as the iPhone. But even then, it took 3 versions of the iPhone until they launched that, and essentially the iPhone 3 became the first model, right? So when you think about that rate of change and the pace of change, even then, when you then keep this mental image of what the iPhone did with smartphones, and the fact that all these things like going to a bank to get money out, for example, by filling in a paper form with a pen and handing it over to a teller, then went to an ATM, that was a change. But then when we could also then move to, say, an app with a single touch, typing in the same PIN number that we'd use on an ATM, but on our phone, wherever we are 24/7 around the world, that happened not in a lifetime, that happened in half a generation. Right? I mean, I remember filling in forms in 1986 to go to the bank and deposit money or get money out. By the 90s, we were still technically doing that, but it was more electronic checks. By 2000, nobody went to the bank anymore. They went to an ATM. By 2006, I don't remember ever going to an ATM or a bank anymore. It was all on my smartphone. So that's just in our lifetime. That's like 2 decades. Now, when you think about now what's happening with fintech, for example, and insurtech, they're not even thinking about it on an app. They're looking at how can a smart agent and I'm going to put mine to sleep now so it doesn't talk to me. But if you turn around and say, Alexa, please move $120,000 to Joshua's account, that will happen, right? So even in just that short period of time, we are now talking to smart speakers, which are inherently dumb, moving money around, one of the most important things in our lives. And, if we look at what's happening with COVID-19, the global pandemic, we have doctors now using smart speakers in rooms so that patients can talk to them via the smart speakers to request questions and answers, so they don't have to enter the room. That is such an eye-wateringly rapid pace of disruption and change that it's just mind-boggling to conceive. And that's only one side of the coin. That's where technology and businesses disrupt themselves. When you look at the other side of the coin, at the risk of going a bit long on this, the single greatest disruption we're seeing now is consumer-driven disruption. Customers that are disrupting their suppliers and vendors. So retail, for example, has been significantly disrupted by the global pandemic, but the actual driver of that disruption is consumers, because they can't go into stores anymore to buy their cappuccino and their coffee buns, whatever. They can't go and try clothes on. So even though the pandemic has driven an opportunity to pivot, the consumers are the driver of the disruption. So retailers have to pivot to online when they never had online. Cafes have had to run out of vans and car parks and get people like AT&T to help them with fixed wireless access and 3 and 5G connectivity to run their FPOS terminals and ATM sort of payments. And that's all been driven by consumers, right? When you think about your experience now and what you do to consume things like you don't go to the cinema anymore, you do Netflix, you don't watch television at 9 o'clock to get the news, you get that online through Instagram or some other platform or Twitter. So you've driven that change because you just stop picking up the right, turning on TV at 9 o'clock to watch the 9 o'clock news. You will pull the news if and when it suits you. So it's eye-wateringly fast-paced, change and rapid disruption. And I think invariably because the barrier to entry has come down from price point, but also because we're demanding that consumer celebrity experience interface to people who sell us things and deliver services to us.
In a way, it seems like the pandemic, which you mentioned there, is almost an accelerant more than anything. That we were thinking of it as a slowdown and a shutdown and lockdown, but really it seems to have just taken all of these very cautious steps that business would have taken and made them suddenly just have to run forward with it. But do you think that these are changes that are going to stick, or are we going to have this inertia pulling us back to normal?
The way I like to describe it, in fact, I was in a boardroom the other day having to whiteboard this out, and I described it as we've already jumped off this cliff. And if you've ever jumped off a cliff, you know it's impossible to get back up there without actually landing somewhere and then walking the long way back to the track to get to the top. So we have, without wanting to, had to jump off this cliff and deal with it. I think the majority of the impact is not going to reverse. We are definitely going to want to sit in cafes and go to restaurants again. But the way in which we interact with those will change. So for example, I have an app now for my local barista, and I just order my cappuccino and wander past and pick it up at a window. I don't wait for 15 minutes in a queue in a stuffy room waiting for my coffee to turn up. So, those use cases have already changed, and retailers have had to go online when they've never been online. They've had to get apps or integrate and leverage things. They've had to do digital payments and moving away from cash. All those changes have happened, even with the worst possible human apathy, where humans are lazy and very arrogant. And when we think of some of the changes that have happened in the last couple of decades, they've come about and people have become lazy, and there's been a high level of apathy, and they go back to their normal ways. I think that in the early days we thought arrogantly that the global pandemic that came with COVID-19, which we're still only figuring out, I think a lot of people misunderstand. If you look at the latest news, even this morning, there are people around the world, particularly in Southeast Asia now, obviously where it started effectively November, December last year. There are people now in South Korea, for example, who have just had their second infection of COVID-19, gotten very sick. And so they were infected by the regional version of it in Southeast Asia. Now they're infected with a version that's made its way all the way back from Europe. And it's hitting them in a different way. So they've effectively realized, oh, there's different versions of COVID-19. It's like, yeah, we knew that. So there's big changes that have taken place because of this global pandemic, which is one of those once in a lifetime experiences in many ways, but it's a change that's going to take a long time. Like, companies are already saying that they're not going to go from work from home to an office for the next 12 months, and, global brands. And it's not just the 3-letter acronyms, it's the Facebooks and the Googles of the world saying, we're not going back to an office for the next 12 months. Get back to us in June, July, 2021. And they don't make that kind of move lightly, right? So I think some of the changes are significant and big and won't reverse. There will be some reluctance. I mean, even just getting idiots to wear a mask right now, and people go, oh, I'm going to die of CO2 poisoning. It's like, really? No. There's going to be some of that dumb stuff happening for a while, but people will just get on board and go, well, I mean, look at Southeast Asia, right? So if I just go in a sideways segue for a moment, there's this ridiculously stupid view in the West. And when I say West, I'm sort of talking about the other side of the planet. Where people go, oh, in Asia, they wear masks. It's, because of pollution. There isn't a single person in Southeast Asia that wears a mask for pollution. It's just not even a thing. It's a cultural thing to wear a mask over here if you have a cold and a flu. And the reason you do that is out of courtesy to the society and public around you, not to infect them. Right? So if you're in Japan or China or Hong Kong or Singapore and Indonesia, Malaysia, if you've got a cold, you wear a mask in a public area, not everywhere, because you don't want to infect all the people around you. It's just social good behavior, right? But there's a narrative where in the West, people go, oh, wearing a mask, blah, blah, you can't see my face. I can't read your expressions. I'm going to die of CO2 poisoning. I don't want to do this. It's like, well, it's not about you. It's about helping the folk around you, right? It's kind of why you don't spit chewing gum on the street, because you may keep walking and not step in it, but the person behind you will. And that's just not a good thing to do. So I think there's some of these changes where parts of the world are having to grow up and wake up that maybe their behavior was probably not great and ideal before. For example, it's common, and here in Australia as well, it's common to go to work with a cough and a cold if you just have a sniffle, because it's like, oh, I'll be fine. I'll just take a cold and flu tablet. It's like, yeah, that's great. But what about the rest of us in the office that don't want to get your cold? Oh, you'll be right. She'll be apples. It's like, so these changes are going to have to come about and stay changed. I think some parts of society around the world just need to grow up. That's going to be interesting. But from a business perspective, if you're a cafe and you've already implemented an online payment system, you've implemented a buy and go model with an app through a third-party integration of some form, and people can order a coffee walking down the street or driving past and then stop and pick it up and go, well, that's brilliant, because now you can do 100 times more orders an hour than you ever did before when you had 20 people staying in the store waiting for your barista to brew it up, right? So we will have some pushback, but I think that'll be a generational thing. I mean, my mum was very reluctant to get a smartphone, but now she has one. She's the biggest abuser of that smartphone I've ever met. It always reminds me of that sort of thing where, someone gives up smoking, they become the biggest proponent of anti-smoking campaigns ever. Mm-hmm. So I think that's going to happen over time. One of the areas I'm really excited about, though, as unfortunate as it is that it's taken a global pandemic to do this, which has killed a lot of people. But in the context of things, the number of people dying it's not necessarily the biggest challenge for us. It's the reason they're dying and the causality. But is the emerging markets, so there are a lot of people obsessing with selling to America or Australia or Europe or the UK, thinking they're big markets. But for me, the opportunity now is to look at where are the new emerging markets. Should I be thinking about selling a new phone into the US market? No, that's just stupid. It's a saturated market. Everyone's had 3 smartphones and they've realized that it's just a waste of money. Once you get to your 3rd smartphone in the developed nations, you just keep it and make it last for 2 or 3 or 4 years. You just put a screen cover on it. It's places like the 54 territories and states of Africa where there's 1.1 billion people, or the 1.3 billion people in India, or the 1.45 billion people in China. That's 3.8 billion people. That's half the world's population who don't have a phone yet. The majority don't have a phone, aren't connected to the internet, and are unbanked. So, I think one of the things we're seeing now is digital technology being put in the hands of people in emerging markets that are helping them stay healthy with reverse tracing and so forth. That they're like, well, this is great, it's making me healthy, but I can do banking on this platform. Yeah. So, there isn't, I don't think it's appropriate to say there's a silver lining to a global pandemic, but there's certainly opportunities to be leveraged for the betterment of humanity. But again, it goes back to, I think there's a lot of growing up to be done. The humans are a very young species, right? I think there's an arrogance in humans that they think we've been around forever, but out of the 4.3 billion years this little planet's been around, we're not even a bat of an eyelid. Dinosaurs were around for 600 million years. We haven't even been around for 1 million years yet. So we're still just figuring this out. We just happen to be sentient, so we think that we're the center of the universe.
That's something I'll have to remember the next time I have the vein throbbing in my forehead and I'm typing on Facebook to someone who doesn't want to wear a mask. It's like, it's okay. We're all like on a scale of a universal scale. We are just barely zygotes. So
there's a phrase that I heard the other day called a maskhole, which is being used to describe them now. But I mean, it's it happens in anything, right? I mean, there are people who don't believe in vaccines for anything, anti-vaxxers, and yet polio and measles are becoming a thing again. And we solve those problems, right? So there'll always be the 1% of the 1% who are just, in my view, patently stupid. And I'm about to get attacked and death threats for that. There is always going to be that. There's always somebody who doesn't wear a seatbelt in the car. There's always someone who goes drinking and then drives. There's always someone who does drugs and drives. There's always somebody who wants to get drunk on an airplane at 30,000 foot off the ground doing 900 miles an hour, thinking that's a good idea, that they're going to be fun to hang around with for 15 hours from Sydney to Las Vegas, to LA. But I think they're the minority. I think all things considered, humans are fairly decent and do their best to get along with each other. That's just how society works. The problem we've got now with the global pandemic and certainly with technology, when you think about things like cybersecurity risk, is that it's the outliers that are the problem, right? If you're a lemming and you're on the edge of a cliff, it's not all the people to your left and right you got to worry about. It's the person behind you if they bump you, right?
Sure. I love the idea of it seems like you're looking to where the puck is going to be versus where the puck is now and have your entire career. So in a very general sense for our B2B marketing audience, where is the puck going? If you're a B2B business person, a leader, an executive, where should you be looking just for the near future?
The advice I've been giving people in the last 3 to 5 years is that there was a time when you could do it all yourself. If you're an airline or a bank, or if you were in healthcare or wealth management, if you're a telco, there was a time when you could do it all. You could run your own telephone systems, you'd run your own technology stack, your own email servers, your own domain name servers. But the complexity is so great now, and the speed at which we have to move at, the rate at which we have to disrupt ourselves and respond, as you alluded to before, is so rapid and so shortened. The demand for reduced time to market, reduced time and investment. The advice I'm giving people now is find the best partner of choice in each of the segments you need to be able to address problems. So if you're a bank, be a bank. Focus on being the best bank you can, and look for things that are going to disrupt you. But don't try and be a phone company. Don't run your own PBXs. Don't run your VoIP systems. If you're on a website, don't becoming a hosting company. Don't waste your time running web servers. And I think we're seeing this now with the adoption of SaaS. And we won't mention their brands because they don't need the free plug. But there are some SaaS providers who led the world in customer relationship management platforms, CRM. Once upon a time, everyone would run a physical dedicated server or two. They would run an operating system. They'd put an application database on it, put a CRM platform on it, and self-host CRM. That's what they thought was the way to do it. That was the only way we could do it, right? These days, it's a swipe of a credit card at $5 a seat per month, and you consume as many as you want and pay as you go and pay as you use. And if an account's idle for a while, you park it while those people are on holiday and you don't pay for the service and you wake up when they come back. So I think the biggest thing that organizations need to think about now, and certainly in the space that we're in more than ever, is that I think there are a lot of people who still think that, whether it's digital marketing, social media communications, B2B interactions, is that they have to do it all themselves. And that time has come and gone a long time ago, probably 15 plus years ago. Now the key is to work out what are your core strengths and where are your weaknesses, and find the right partner, and a partner of choice is a term I like to use. One that you are going to get along with, that you're going to be able to have a long-standing relationship with, and seek their support, seek their help, and leverage their key strengths and look for their partnerships and see who you can leverage through that. Because at the end of the day, that whole concept of B2B, right, business to business, essentially, we think that it relates for businesses doing businesses with businesses or selling to them, but we also need to look at it from the other side of things. And it's not just selling business to business, it's also consuming business to business. So it's great that I might want to sell you something from my business to your business in the B2B model. But what about if I ask you the question of what can you sell me, or what can you support me with from your business to my business? So, it's a double-edged sword in many ways, because you're relinquishing some of the control in many ways. But if it's done properly and managed properly, and you understand what you're consuming and how you're consuming it, then it's ever more easy to churn from one vendor to another within reason if you need to. Yeah, I think it just goes back to make some smart decisions about where your core strengths are, and fill those gaps with people who can partner with you or become vendors and suppliers to strengthen your position. Don't try and do it all yourself.
I think it has been interesting seeing the pushback for a while in the enterprise level business was, well, if we go with this vendor, then we can't customize down to the nth degree. We can't get really granular with all these options that we have set up on our private thing. I think what they're discovering is we don't need to. And maybe if we just have this off-the-shelf solution combined with these 4 plugins and one thing that Bob in IT is going to write for the API, then we can get by, and it's better because we don't have to do it ourselves. That's a weird kind of idea, yeah.
Well, there's, when we think about this from a social media point of view in the context of today's conversation, I guess, if you look at the MySpace experience, which probably ages me, one of the biggest headaches with MySpace was that it provided too much customization, right? You could change your look and feel and fonts and shapes and widgets and colors to the point where, a lot of people stopped using it because someone would set a fluorescent, crazy, flashing, glaring interface because they wanted to trip out on it. And Wired magazine learnt this, actually. When you think about Wired magazine in their early days of having a website, they used to do some really zany stuff until they realized that people stopped visiting their website and went back to the print magazine because it was just garish to use. So they went back to design principles, right? In fact, a lot of web design these days goes back to print design principles because we've had multiple generations with, black ink on white paper. We just like that. Having a reversed like a black website with white text on it, it's just jarring to our brains. It's a negative experience. So we're like, okay, well, let's just make everything look like paper. So I think it comes down to a phrase that I tend to use a lot, and that is that what is the cost of choice? What benefit and value does your organization gain by being able to change it? So if we look at the example I gave you with MySpace and compare it with Facebook, where you can't change anything, or Twitter, in the early days, you could change almost everything about Twitter. You could change look and feel and color and the theme. These days, they've locked it down so much, we've forgotten that we even had a choice because it just works and we actually don't care, right? So I think you then get to the point where it's like, well, what choice do I need? What choice do I want? Yes, I can load my logo in the top left-hand corner. Cool. Or if you're in the Middle East, you put it in the top right-hand corner. Do I need it to be a different color? Maybe I can change the branding a little bit. Then you ask the question, well, not so much what price does choice give you, but what value does it give you? Do I really care? It's like, if you buy a printer, you don't go and buy a different color printer. It's like, I've always wondered why, someone like Hewlett and Packard in their consumer division didn't do like, Hello Kitty pink, laser printers. Because there's no demand for that, right? Why does every laptop generally come in silver or gunmetal gray or something to that effect? Even now, think of the limitation of the colors of phones. It's because at the end of the day, people don't care. They just want a phone to make a phone call. They want a laptop to work. They want a printer to print. So I think that is now translated into the people's online experience, which is, when was the last time you actually cared about the look and feel of Twitter versus the function that it gives you? When did you last care about LinkedIn and Facebook and what it looks and feels like versus the functionality you get from it? I think this is an interesting thing that we're learning now, is that we thought we wanted and needed choice. Maybe we didn't. I think there's some downsides over time with that because, we all start looking like the same sheep. It always amuses me when a clothing brand brings out something new and you end up with a whole bunch of teenagers buying the same outfit, running around thinking they're new and innovative and the fashionistas doing great things. And then they go to the movies or they go to a shopping mall and there's 50 of them looking and feeling the same. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm not unique anymore. I'm just one of the 5,000 people that bought the same hat, the same outfit, the same sunglasses, right? I think there's some pros and cons there. I mean, from a functionality point of view, do we care what the look and feels like versus that it just does the job? I mean, I've never remembered having a thought in my mind of, I wish my Amex wasn't black and with silver print I wanted, whatever. I wish my Amex was not green with white print. I mean, I don't care what my Amex card color is. I just care that when I swipe it, it works. But do I care about the color of my car? Yes. But then I can have it in 3 to 5 colors at the most. Mm-hmm. It always reminds me of that famous quote from Thomas Ford, where it's like, you can have any color you want as long as it's black, right?
Right.
So, there's some standardization that comes about. There's benefits of standardization and so forth that brings down the cost. The reason there's only 3 to 5 colors for a car is it's easy to manufacture lots of them and you can get one off the lot. If you want a custom car, it could take 6 weeks to get it manufactured and painted at the factory and bought. So if you want to do that and you don't need the car in 6 weeks, great. Custom order it and get, sheepskin wool rugs on the floor if you want to, but it just takes a while to do it. But if you want to get one tomorrow and stick it on your personal loan on a credit card and drive it off the lot today, then you can have it in, red, black, white, silver, and blue. But that's it, maybe green. So.
Yeah, I think that is exactly it. That people in the enterprise discovered, maybe I don't need to tweak 700 settings in my CRM. Maybe the 50 most common options are enough for me. By the way, I have a T-shirt from a major brand, like a marketing brand that shall remain nameless, that on the back says, "I'm unique, just like my content." And it is one of 500 shirts that they handed out at a conference. And so going through the conference, I got to wear that shirt and see 500 other people proclaiming how unique they are.
Yeah, I mean, Coca-Cola is the famous one for that, right? I always like using them at the risk of naming a brand, where it's like, it doesn't matter where you look at that brand. Everybody thinks that there's an attractive young guy or girl with a puppy on a beach throwing a frisbee, and that's the lifestyle when they drink this crazy sugar drink that's going to make them obese and kill them eventually. But nobody wants to talk about the fact that obesity is driven by sugar drinks and junk food. They want to push this message. So, and it's like, everybody gets their own Coke. And I remember they experimented by putting names on it, and it backfired massively, because what they found was that people went to the fridges in the stores and the retailers looking for their name. If they couldn't find it, they're like, I don't feel like a Coke anymore. It has got my name. So they killed it off, right? And I remember seeing this thinking, wow, that's everything that they are not. Every Coke bottle is the same. It tastes the same, looks the same. In fact, the interesting thing is that even when you travel around the world, they manufacture the sugary drink and color it locally, and it still generally is the same basic flavor and taste. It might only change a small amount. And all of a sudden they customize it with a name on it. Same font, look and feel, red badge, white font color, but it was like, that's a weird move. But anecdotally, I've heard that the team that did that didn't last very long, and the agency that created the idea was axed immediately and was like, hang on, this is everything that goes against the grain of what we're about, which is, we want you to think that you're getting a unique experience when you buy it in the fridge, but you're not. You're just a number, and we just want you to swipe your credit card. So, there's some big lessons to be learned like that, where a brand like Coca-Cola or Amatil have won the sugar water game for so long we can't remember when it started. But they still trip up, right? If a brand that big trips up by putting a name on it, and all of a sudden you don't buy it in the fridge if you can't find your name because you were going to buy it from an emotive point of view, not because you were thirsty or needed a sugar fix, then, we can all relearn those experiences. But certainly enterprise, I think, because of the very monolithic and sometimes glacial rate of change inside the enterprise space, where there's a very big sunk costs. Those sunk costs have a long running ROI window. If you're a bank, you might have built an environment in a data center that took you 15 years to break even and then get a return on investment. So there's some big sunk costs. In the old days of putting mainframes in a building that was the size of a room could take you 20 years to recover the cost of that. And you still had to make a profit on your operating model. These days you can buy a bank in the cloud, so that's a different model. But still, enterprise approaches are not as rapid as startups, which is why enterprise keep trying to build startup models. Consumer brands still are built by supply chains and manufacturing and warehousing and retail outlet models that take time to drive. You might go and buy that T-shirt in a shop today, but it didn't get there yesterday. It was manufactured 3 or 4 months ago. It was warehoused and packaged. It was shipped FOB from a warehouse to a wharf somewhere. It made its way somewhere to the other side of the planet on an ISO 42-foot container. It was then put in another wharf and then shipped somewhere else to unpack and warehoused, boxed up, shipped to another holding space, put on a shelf, made available, taken out of the plastic bag, hung on a rack somewhere, and hopefully in your size. And you walked in and went, oh, great, it's available, I'll buy it. So your experience was that it was there instantly when you wanted it. But it took months to get from being from a plant to being turned into cotton and then cut into size and then sewed and then packaged and shipped. And I think that's where enterprises are learning now that there are some models that they can't change. Supply changes take time. And certainly COVID-19 is woken us up to that. But we are looking for ways that we can change that. And certainly when it's a software, I think in the telecoms world and 5G, we're learning that now that, 5G networks are software defined. So we don't have to actually plug cables in anymore. We're not plugging in for RJ45 cables and routers and switches, and they're not sitting in racks. That is all a cloud model. So we can build a phone company in a cloud as a service and instantiate it immediately in minutes, whereas it would take a year and a half to build a phone company before. You can buy for $25 a seat a CRM solution for $1 billion company if you want to, and it's just as good as the 12-month long program to implement a CRM on a dedicated cluster in your office that still just gives you one user to log in and get a web interface, right? So there's some interesting things that the enterprise are able to now do. It just requires a change in their thinking, because that experience over time doesn't change as fast as the capability to change, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And that's something that we've talked about with a lot of folks in the enterprise space, that just sometimes having that slow and steadiness that has been an asset until very recently is now a detriment. And
so it's a liability, right?
You have to start to think about as though you are a startup, but then you also have, like you said, all those sunk costs and all that baggage to try and unpack as well. So yeah.
Well, marketing is a classic example of that, which I guess is really the theme of today's conversation, and that is that once upon a time, we thought about TVC, radio, print, magazines, newspaper, banners, flyers on the wall, billboards. Unless you have far too much money to burn, who's doing billboards outside these days, right? I can't target you with a billboard. I can't geo-tag you on anything to do with the billboard. Billboards are a dinosaur and dead. And the only reason people are doing them is they have more money than brains and they're just burning cash on billboards. But I've got a personal billboard in your pocket. And when you pick it up and open the screen and swipe to unlock and punch in a pin or do face unlock, I can put a billboard in front of you at any time and place, wherever you are, anytime you are, by a whole bunch of levers and knobs to tweak it to you and customize it based on what you bought in the last 5 years, what you bought in the last 5 minutes, in the last 5 seconds, what the last 10 tweets you've looked at. So when we think about it from a marketing perspective, enterprises in that B2B space are still having to come to grips with that idea that their legacy and age-old, tried and proven marketing and sales techniques are no longer relevant. Now, that doesn't mean that if I'm going to buy a bulldozer from Caterpillar, that I'm going to do it on a tweet, right? I always have this fun thing that I throw out there, and that is that, working with companies like IBM, for example, I've only met one person that bought a mainframe for $6.3 million on a tweet, and that was because they were one of my followers, and an associate inside the Department of Finance for a government agency that I consult to, and it was kind of a joke. It's like, I bought a mainframe because of your tweet, but he didn't really. But I certainly know people that have bought products from a tweet at a consumer level, right? When Kim Kardashian tried to break the internet by putting her nude bum out there with soap on the back of it, people probably bought the soap product or the face cream. So if you want to sell that, you go to Instagrammers and you sell products to people of their peerage, right? I think Tommy Hilfiger, for example, is classic of that. My son went through an obsessed period of buying the same T-shirts that influencers were wearing on Instagram and Snapchat and so forth, because that was a very clever marketing that a large enterprise with a brand saw was possible, and they pivoted to it. I think there's an opportunity for a large enterprise now to look at all their models and say, okay, depending on who our market is, how can we have that conversation with them now? And one of the big phrases I like to throw out there is that I'm telling people to stop selling and start telling. We are all sick to death of being sold to, but I am always looking forward to someone telling me about something new, right? Because I consume that in my own speed and my own pace. If I don't watch television, if I don't read newspapers, and if I don't read magazines, if I don't go to the cinema, then you can't sell to me anymore. So how do you sell to me? Well, maybe people go, we do paid ads. Every time I see an ad, I block it. I'm a militant now. If I see an ad pop up, I will click on it and report it saying, this ad is not interesting. If it is interesting, then great, I might have a look at it, but that's very rare still. So how do you get my attention? Well, have a conversation with me. How do you do that? Well, join the conversation by, as we did earlier today, have a Twitter chat with our friends at AT&T, for example, or run a live stream, or something that's a content consumption model that makes sense now, that isn't selling. Let me join that conversation. Let me get involved in what you're doing. Bring your subject matter experts to the forefront. I don't really want to know about the brand yet. I want to know who's in your organization that can help me. What's in it for me? So I think that's a big pivot that's still happening in the enterprise space. I mean, startups have leveraged it because that's what startups do. They're not tied by any legacy, models or thinking. B2C has certainly pivoted. Consumer space has always moved quickly. It always kind of reminds me of the porn industry is a classic. People go, people don't like to talk about the porn industry, but if you want to see where disruption's happening, you follow the porn industry. They will move as quickly as they possibly can to get to the consumers where the consumers want to be, and for obvious reasons. But nobody ever went to the cinema to watch porn. Just never happened, right? But the greatest consumption of porn is on little tiny screens in all interesting places. Consumers now are walking around with televisions in their pockets. We have a cinema in our pocket. We have a billboard in our pocket. So I think the B2B space, the enterprise space, if you want to sell big, heavy things, if you want to sell small widgets, you need to figure out how do you have a conversation with me? How can you get my attention, but without yelling and screaming at me? And how can you entice me to come on a journey for you? Because I think the challenge for enterprise also has to be considered in the context of you are never going to know when I have a buying decision, whether it's a pain point or some of the key driver. You're never ever going to know that, right? And if you think about the magazine model, people had to put ads in magazines with full page ads, usually, and the inside cover was always sought out. And you had to run it for 3 months back to back, even before you got my attention. And that was really expensive. If you're paying 15 grand a page and you're doing that for 3 months, it's $45,000 worth of sunk cost before I even actually noticed you, let alone engage with you. Well, you can do that for 45 cents now. And you can do that on a 45-cent cost per click, which only costs you 45 cents if I actually clicked on something. That changes the game dramatically. And if I click on it, I'm joining a conversation you've invited me to. Yeah, I think there's some really exciting opportunities now for organizations to be a lot more media savvy and a lot more digitally savvy. I think less obsessed with social media and more obsessed with the digital experience, that social media is a starter of the conversation, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That's kind of the drumbeat that our agency has been pushing for many years now. And I wish that we didn't have to call it influencer marketing, because that we share that term with everyone on Instagram who's holding up a skateboard or a beauty product or something. But in B2B, that is doing what you're talking about. It's finding the people who the audience is already talking to and trust, and saying, hey, can you come and do something cool with us? And that way we'll get access to your audience, you'll get access to our audience. And that is kind of the model that we've been pushing for a while now. But real quick, because I know we're running out the clock, but on your before we started our official recording, you were talking about how the term influencer doesn't resonate with you very well. Would you like to expand on that just a little bit for us?
Yeah, well, my son refers to me as the world's oldest YouTuber, which I kind of wear as a badge of honor. So I've had 3+ decades in a number of key big industries: banking, wealth management, finance, transport, aviation, logistics, education, healthcare. I've been involved in helping build data centers for phone companies. We've built hospitals from scratch. We've transformed airports. A lot of my companies did very big physical infrastructure projects, or did things like, develop the cloud strategy for federal governments. I was involved in bringing the internet to Australia in the early days and ran one of the largest ISPs in the region for a number of times. So when you think about now, the grand old age of 52, the idea that I'm running essentially what people would call a startup, well, I don't tend to refer to my business as a startup, even though it is technically small. We're just bootstrapping a new business. We're not seeking venture capital. We're self-funded. To think that 50 plus and I'm now running a fairly successful digital media and agency style company that drives messaging for large Fortune 50 brands is quite funny. So, I think the interesting thing is that because we drive online conversations through digital and social media, we end up working invariably with not just CMOs and CEOs, but of course, the digital team, the PR team, the marketing team, the comms team, and invariably the influencer relationship team and so forth. And so then we sort of get bundled in with the influencers, quote unquote. And I think what happens then is that, if you look at what's happening in enterprise, a lot of large enterprises have sort of turned around and gone, we're going to do social media. Let's tick that box. And then they get into a room somewhere with the marketing team going, who's got a social media account? And someone puts their hand up and says, I'm a millennial. I've got an Instagram account. I'll do it. And invariably they get the job of running influencer marketing, right? Or social media and running their Twitter and LinkedIn and Instagram and Facebook accounts. So I think there's this misnomer that when, if I use myself as an example, I tend not to let people refer to me as an influencer, because that's 0.0001% of what we might be able to do as far as bringing value to the table. So if I sit in a boardroom with C-suite, I've spent 3 decades being their peer. Most of the CEOs that I work with around the world are 15 plus year friends or associates that I've done business with. And so when I work with big telco brands, I've helped put them into some of the biggest phone companies in the world. I built some of the data centers, not me personally as it were, but my company and I. We've built some of the biggest data centers for these companies. So to then turn around and actually drive a digital conversation for them to then get back into other telcos without naming some of the brands of the telco platform providers and equipment manufacturers, is kind of funny, because it's like, the guy, you're one of our influencers. Like, well, we drive influence, we create outcomes, but I wouldn't say I'm an influencer, but we can drive that outcome. It's kind of like, no one ever thought of Wall Street Journal as an influencer, but that's actually what they are. And yet when we think about driving, if we think about tweeting, for example, and they go, oh, you're an influencer, you tweet. Well, That's one of 17 platforms that we produce content for. Oh, you've got a podcast. You're an influencer. I'm syndicated on 65 of the biggest platforms in the world. That doesn't make me an influencer. I'm a publisher and podcaster. And so eventually when you look at it, it's like, well, what's the definition of an influencer? And so I put it this way. I generally like to describe what we do as not really just limited to being an influencer per se. That's 0.001% of it, as I said. It's driving outcomes. And so when we have a conversation, we don't just talk about influencer marketing. That's a tiny, tiny segment of what we do. It's taking an idea from a business plan and a sales and marketing strategy and a go-to-market roadmap around sales, marketing, comms, business development, whatever, and mapping what's the outcome you want. And what have you started to do yourselves that you're investing in? And where are the gaps in that? And how can we fill those gaps with digital and social conversations? And how can we create these campaigns to drive those outcomes such that if and when someone has a pain point or a buying decision, we have ensured through driving awareness, education, and engagement in the form of influence, that you are top of mind and center of heart at that point of a buying decision, if that makes sense. So, sometimes people go, don't be offended by being called an influencer. It's like, it's not that I'm offended, but it significantly constrains the way in which we approach the conversation. If I walk into an event and they're going, oh, here comes our influencer, it's like, great, and then, I'll happily sit down and have dinner with the CEO and have a conversation about what they're doing to run a $50 billion company. But then I'll also sit down with the CMO and talk about what they're doing for their go-to-market comms plan. But then I'll also sit down with someone with an iPhone and talk about how to curate tweets in such a way that we might do 300 tweets in a week and delete 299 that didn't work the way we want, take the one that we like and iterate that, and then do that 300 times. So I think the key thing there is to have a couple of decades of experience on your belt and know in context the conversation you have to have with the relevant people at different levels to drive those outcomes. Does that make you an influencer? In essence, yes. Does it generate the response we want? No, because what happens is people think about influencers in the B2C market, as you said, with kids wearing funky t-shirts and a beach holding a Coke with a puppy and some hot looking friends. And I don't think that helps the enterprise space. I don't think enterprise approaching social selling and digital selling in the way that you would sell a Coke generates the outcomes they want. I don't know any CIO that bought a banking solution because they saw someone running down the beach with a puppy and a can of Coke. But what they do subscribe to is their peers from large organizations having a conversation at that level about the pain points they have and how they can help them with that, if that makes sense.
No, that is true. In a presentation recently, I was talking about how it's not the audience number of followers that somebody has can be misleading, because you could, with enough of a budget, get Taylor Swift to talk about your software as a service solution. But how many CEOs are going to take Taylor Swift's advice on your software as a service solution? So it's not the number of people, it's the number of people who you can move.
Absolutely. And one of the biggest challenges we're facing now with what people refer to as social media, I guess, is that, I have, I'm not saying this from an ego point of view, I promise you, but just to put some context in, to use myself as an example. I have prime ministers and ex-prime ministers of nations, ex-prime ministers of Japan, Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, Australia. An associate, Kevin Rudd, follows me in Australia. I have people that are movie stars that I've had conversations with that invariably follow me. I have C-suite that follow me. And people go, oh, you're not getting all the interaction that Taylor Swift gets. And it's like, well, Taylor Swift's followed by some really funky, engaged fans that want to have a very public conversation about that. But the ex-Prime Minister of Australia, Kevin Rudd, who follows me, heads up the G20. He can't click like. If he clicks like on something, it has connotations. It has impacts. Global leaders think that he may or may not agree with my tone or attitude or quirky way. And the way I relate this to clients, when I talk to any of our Fortune 50s, for example, and I say, well, when did the CEO of AT&T or Ericsson or Broadcom or Commvault or Intel click like on a tweet? Never. Why? Well, firstly, because they're busy, and secondly, they probably don't actually use Twitter natively. You've got people like, Michael Dell, who claims he's self-employed, which I think is pretty cool. And he's hip and grooved to the thing, and he runs around with a phone and he does tweet. You've got people like Elon Musk. They're the outliers. They're very rare. But does the CEO of Intel click like on a tweet? No. A, just doesn't have time to do that or the inclination. But B, if that level of C-suite role engages socially, that has connotations. It's being watched, it's being monitored. If the head of a large bank clicks on a like on a brand tweet about a piece of hardware or software or whatever the case may be, that could sway their share price. So, when people say, oh, well, whether you've got a large number of following or not, there's a significantly lower level of engagement in the enterprise space that we play in, for example. But I don't publish content in the form of, microblogging, as we refer to generally, or tweets and posts on LinkedIn to get likes and even comments or retweets. I'm doing that in the same way that I'd put an ad in a newspaper or magazine to gain awareness and education. The engagement might result in clicks that you can't see, right? There's reasons that platforms don't show how many times something's been clicked on. They might show how many times you got a like. That's great because that was sort of drove the dopamine response of I feel famous. But nothing in the consumer space really relates to the B2B space because Taylor Swift might get 30,000 engagements on one tweet about her exciting new project to send tens of thousands of signed CDs to indie music stores for free to help them out stay alive during a global pandemic when no one can go to a music store without potentially feeling like they're getting coughed on. But that's great. That's a Facebook level experience, no matter what platform you're on, right? So 30,000 people click like on a Taylor Swift tweet. That's the same experience you'd get being my friend, like, I want more likes on Facebook. That transition from Facebook to Twitter. But will the C-suite engage on a tweet that I do for a large brand around a technology or a software platform or business decision? No, because their consumption model is not that Taylor Swift clicking on it like a fan screaming to the music, going to listen to a CD or streaming. Their experience is make me aware of what I don't know so I can make better decisions to help my business and what's in it for me. So often when people say, oh, your engagement's low or you don't get a lot of likes, it's like, well, when did your CEO click like on something? Because they're the CEOs that are watching our content. So if the CEO of Intel doesn't click on like something, why would the CEO of a bank that follows me click on like or something? So there's this expectation that I think needs to be addressed as well, right? That is that whether you've got a large following or not, invariably a large following often means that you've been around for a while. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time before I even attempted to enter into this sort of digital and social influencer space as people are talking about. I was writing articles for newspapers when I was a 14-year-old kid for a school newspaper, right? I've had plenty of opportunity to do keynotes for big companies that I was partners with or reselling when we were doing stuff like that. Now to be on the other side of it, I think the conversation we have to have is, it is not important how many likes you got on a tweet. What's important is how many people clicked on the URL to go and get the ebook or watch the webinar or join the live stream, or how many people clicked on something to request a phone back or call back to sort of have a conversation with buying something big. So we need to move the dial and change the dialogue on what that actually means. I mean, with the greatest respect to my followers, I love them, but I actually don't care if they click on like, because I understand that they're busy. They can't visibly be seen clicking on like, and it has connotations. If the head of the G20 clicks like on something, that's going to have a globally visible impact on what people think they may or may not interpret what I'm doing. And I fully accept that an ex-prime minister is not going to click on like on my tweets. I don't take that personally. I never had the expectation that C-suite are going to click on like something. I'm not doing it for that reason. I'm trying to inform them.
And I think that does come back to what you were talking about with outcomes, that marketers are frequently measuring in terms of tactics that they're using, like you said, ticking a box on that list. And instead of that, maybe we need to be pivoting more over to the outcomes.
Well, all the tools we're using now were developed for B2C tracking and monitoring, right? We have weekly calls with most of the big brands and these platforms, without naming them, but you know them, talking about how they're going to pivot to the B2B model. How are we tracking the engagement and the reach, not just impressions, but reach and engagement to get awareness, education, and engagement monitoring. Because most of these platforms count likes, impressions, retweets, comments. And to be honest, I actually don't care how many likes and comments and retweets we get if I only get one CEO picking up the phone to the head of technology for one of the biggest brands in the world to say, when can my team and I meet with you to talk about how you're going to digitally transform our airline? Now, you can't monitor that engagement with any online platform. If a CEO says to one of their technical advisors, pick up the phone and set up a call with insert name of brand. We want to transform our airline. No monitoring platform online is going to pick that up. But when they had the first meeting, if that brand says, just out of curiosity, what compelled you to pick up the phone and set up a call with my team? They go, oh, we were actually watching this live stream with Dez Blanchfield and his team from Sociaall and the team from TopRank driving this campaign. And it woke us up to the fact that we need to digitally transform our airline because COVID-19 is not sending people to agencies to book tickets anymore. Great, tick. A $60,000 3-month campaign just drove $1 million opportunity because I asked the question to qualify. Should you have run that digital campaign to get that opportunity? Yes, because that's what drove it. Should you worry about how many clicks and retweets it got? No, because you can't monitor that. It just makes no sense. So yeah, I think there's a lot of maturity and evolution to be undertaken in that space because we have B2C thinking coming into B2B space because that's our experience with the tools and the approaches. I mean, even down to, for example, the phraseology, the terminology. People think that I'm a quirky tweeter, but that's because I'm not tweeting at a 16-year-old kid trying to buy a Minecraft plugin. I'm talking to a peer as a CEO. Right? If I want to get the attention of the CEO, I talk to them as a CEO. I'm not going to go, yo, dude, click on this to buy a mainframe. And it's cool and groovy and it flashes blue, you know, and it comes with a bumper sticker, as if, right? So there's a language, a vernacular, a terminology, there's a tone, there's an approach, a cadence, a time of date. There's all these nuances that are going to get the attention, hopefully, of C-suite as a peer, as opposed to some kid just tweeting because it's something they copy and paste out of a brochure and B2C experience.
Well, this has been Dez Blanchfield just digging into the very essence of what B2B marketing is. I feel like I could keep you here for another hour just listening to what you have to say, but out of respect for you and for everyone who's watching, I won't do that. But I am so grateful that you took the time to be with us today, and thank you very much for sharing with us. And is there anything that you would like our followers to do in terms of following you and checking out your stuff?
My only ask is that people join the conversation. That's all I want people to do. I think that if there was one phrase that I might, if I was going to be buried and put in the grave somewhere with a tombstone, would be just join the conversation, if and when it suits you. And if people do follow me, they'll see quite often that I'll just randomly pick someone that's followed me or whatever the case may be and screenshot that and post it and go, hey, Joshua, thanks for following me. Great. Have you joined the conversation? How are you going? I think if anything, I would just love your audience to join the conversation, if and when it suits them on whatever platform suits them. And, you know, reach out, let us know what we can do to help them. I think that's probably the thing I'd love to leave people with is join the conversation.
Fantastic. And I'm very glad that I joined your conversation. Thank you. And we will see you all on the next time of the TopRank Break Free B2B podcast, videocast, everything cast.